If you haven't watched the prologue for this video, I suggest you go back and watch it. There'll be a link below in the description, or you go to my channel, and it was the video published before this one. Good evening. So, trying to decide where to pick up, because there are so many stories and so many things that happened over the couple years that I worked at this location, and a lot of it blobs together. So I had to make some notes and come up with a sequence of events to try to paint a picture for you folks on what was happening here. Like I said, the building you see pictured in the background, most of the activity happened in this building, and more specifically the fourth floor, and some strange things in some other parts of this building as well. And like I said, this was part of a bigger office complex with really tall, very large office buildings, much larger than this one. And those other buildings were staffed 24/7. This one was not. It's just had an officer go over there a couple times a night and check on things. The doors were locked. You needed a key card to get into the building and to operate the elevators and go anywhere. And all the stairwell doors were locked. So it was pretty much shut down. It had some cameras and a fire alarm system. And we'll talk about that stuff first, because I think that's kind of important. And that was kind of where a lot of the trouble started. So I got transferred to this office division from a retail division. The retail division was much faster paced, much more cops and robbers, lots of things going on, lots of report writing and long hours, and a lot of fun, a lot of stress. And this was just so quiet and laid back. And I got transferred at the same time as another guy who I worked with over there. We'll call him Eric. And he got the swing shift, and I got the graveyard shift, or more specifically, he got what they call the dog shift, where I think it was 3 days swing shift and 2 days graveyard to cover my days off and the other guy's days off. So the first month there, I was in training. I got shown all the buildings, all the checks, how the systems works, all the little ins and outs. Got to meet all the guys that I was now in charge of, and explained all the buildings and how the key cards work, their fire control rooms, because it's most important when you're in security on these buildings is where's the fire control room, which operates the fire panel. Now, talking about this little building, I remember one of my first days there, one of the guys who had worked there a long time, we were talking about CBT, and he said, "Oh, you know it's haunted," and you get a little chuckle, and you get somebody else say, "Yeah, lots of strange stuff happens over there." And then the guy who was training me kind of rolled his eyes, and he's like, "Don't pay any attention to him. Hauntings aren't real." And kind of asked around, and people are like, "Well, I've never experienced anything, but so and so has." And it was kind of that kind of thing, and I just kind of ignored it because I had a new job and new pay and new hours and everything else to come across. So it was a little whiles after I was done with my probation training there, and I was on my own, getting to know the guys, walking around with them, familiarizing myself. And since there was an officer posted at each building, I was basically the mobile unit, and if there was another issue off-site or somewhere else, I had to go check it out. Well, it was like my very first night, we got a fire alarm went off, and it was fourth floor of the CBT building. And I go up there, the building officer goes with me, we go up there, the lobby smoke detector, elevator lobby. So we go up there, we get out of the elevator lobby and go to the smoke detector, and they're all labeled, smoke detector 6-31, whatever. We find it, and I'm like, well, there's no smoke, there's no dust, there's nothing going on. Like I described in the earlier video, it's an abandoned floor, it's all gutted out, there's nothing going on here. You got a little bit of a creeped out feeling, and we went down to the fire panel and reset it and called off the fire department, and false alarms happen. Later on that night, it happened again, and it was a different smoke detector. This time it was in a corridor in the inner ring, as I explained. Go over there, and this time I was like, well, this is getting strange. I'm standing right underneath it. I had another officer in the fire control room. He reset everything. It reset. And about that time, I thought I heard some footsteps, like really faint shuffling, because the outer ring was concrete floors, and it almost sounded like someone kind of, shuffled or skid their feet a little bit on concrete floor. And I open up one of the double doors and look around. I don't see anything. It's all glass that reflects. It's all building glass. I don't see anything in reflections. I go, hello? And I was like, well, that's really weird. And I go, hello? And I walk around the ring, and, you can hear, because it's a fairly small building and it's all open, you can hear if someone's going to shut a door or footsteps, and it is like dead quiet. You can hear a pin drop other than my own steps. I don't see anything, I don't hear anything, and I just assume that, building creaking, it's a dusty building that's setting off the smoke alarm, whatever. So that happened, and then a few nights later it happened again, and then it happened again, and then it just got to the point of really annoying. And then I think I got a hold of my boss, say, hey, can you have the company come out and take a look at these smoke detectors? We have the same two that are always going off, and it's always on this fourth floor, which is strange because there's no traffic or anything there. It's a blocked off floor. You can't even get to it unless you have a security key card. Even during the day, it's blocked off. It's an empty floor. It's trying to be leased out kind of a thing. And I was driving around one night. So they checked out the smoke detector, and I was driving around one night, and I hadn't had any issues for 3 or 4 weeks, a month. And I'm in the parking structure, which is the one that you see next to the building. And I get this all of a sudden I'm driving with the windows down, and I'm on the 3rd floor of the structure. And I look over at that 4th floor because the building's dark, but there are a few emergency lights on the 4th floor. I'm driving around the 3rd floor of the structure, looking over at the 4th floor, and it's kind of lit. And a building lit at night, you can see into it, versus during the day when it's bright outside, you can see out, but you're kind of hidden. And I kind of blinked. I'm like, do I see it look like almost like a figure or something in there? And I'm like, well, that's really odd. And then I'm driving, and I slow down, and I'm driving past pillars and looking out through the parking structure. And I'm like, well, now I don't see it. Oh, well, there's lots of reflections on the glass. It's a city and headlights and stuff like that. So I'm sure I just saw headlights or the reflections of my vehicle going out, 75 yards over to the building. Something, pretty logical at this point. But right as I said that, the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I got really creeped out. I'm like, this is really strange. And I start to drive away, and I get a phone call from the dispatcher. I get a call over the radio. Hey, the 4th floor fire alarm's going off again. And at this point, I'm like, mother effer. Somebody is up there, and somebody's screwing with me. So we go over there, and I call dispatch on my phone, and I say, hey, can you pull up the cameras, see if anybody's going in and out of the buildings, see if any key cards have been activated, because you can track all that. And he's like, no one's been in and out of that building. No key cards have been activated. No one's done anything. The janitors left hours ago, and they don't even have access to the 4th floor. So I go up there, look at there's no fire, go down, reset the panel, call off the fire department, and say, well, I guess that goes for them fixing it like they were supposed to. But I'm like, I swear I saw somebody up there. And I was debating whether or not to do a report, and it was really strange, but I just kind of ignored it as it had to have just been lights on the window. There was no evidence of anybody going in and out of the building. And so, yeah, this was all very, very odd. And the next day, the swing shift officer, who we'll call Eric, I walked in, and there's a shared supervisor desk. There's a Bible sitting there, and I'm like, dude, what's the Bible for? And he's like, and he was a joke around, kind of a tough guy, joke around guy, had lots of swagger. And he just looked at me real stern, and he was like, man, the other night, I got super creeped out in that parking structure. Now, I didn't tell anybody what happened to me. So I got super creeped out in there, and then there was a fire alarm in the CBT, and I had to go check it out, and I got super, super creeped out, and I thought I heard footsteps, and I'm like, you're kidding me. He's like, no. I'm like, I had the same thing happen. I'm like, you think we got a jokester? And I'm like, someone's going to do it on swing shift and stick around for 8 hours later and do it to me on graveyard and not have any of the doors open or keys or show up on camera. And he said, well, what's the Bible for? And he's like, man, if I got to go back in that building, I'm clutching this Bible tight. It makes me feel better. It's like, I won't go over there unless I absolutely have to. And coming from Eric, it was real odd. I remember working with him on the retail side, and he would tackle suspects and get in and break up bar fights and, real tough and tumble kind of guy, And so this was just some of the very beginnings of an odd place. Now, the big incident that happened that I think I want to talk about in this video, and this is really where things started to escalate. And I can honestly know at this point it was partially my fault, partially my coworkers' faults, because I had Daniel and Mikey, 2 other coworkers, and Mikey was very religious, and he was into all this stuff, and he turned me on to Coast, and was into the terms he coined it, spiritual warfare, and demonic entities, and ghosts, and all this kind of stuff. And So one night he's like, "Hey, let's go check out the fourth floor," because we kept getting fire alarms over there. Um, uh, we kept getting fire alarms going off over there. People were getting creeped out at this point. I didn't know what was going on. I actually thought maybe they were hoaxing me as the new guy, but it just didn't make sense on how they would be able to do that. Um, so anyway, we go over there. Remember, it was Mikey and I, and we're walking around on the fourth floor. We get out of the elevators. It's dead quiet. We're in the inner ring, and the inner ring has these like can lights. They look like those Hollywood black lights that go on a track with the little fins on the top side and sides of the projector type lights like you see in the movies. And I'm walking down this hallway, the inner corridor, and it's really quiet, and we're sneaking around. This huge crashing sound above me in the ceiling. The light had fell off of one of those tracks, barely missed my head, and was dangling by the wire right as I walked underneath it. We got super creeped out. I ran past him. We got out of there. We got out of the inner ring. We looked around. We got back. We caught our breath, and we're like, that's really odd. And I said, we're going to make a work order for faulty lighting or something for the maintenance crew to come take a look at it. Well, it was a night or two later. Mikey, Daniel, and I, we get up the courage, and Mike, he thought himself as some kind of spiritual healer, God bless him. And he had holy water and anointing oil, and he had his Bible, and he was saying little prayers up on the fourth floor. And he said, this is something spiritual. And I was still kind of new to all this stuff and a new job and a young guy. And it was just very, like, okay, I'm just going to go with this. It was intriguing, but scary, and you didn't want to deal with it, but you did at the same time. You guys know how addictive this paranormal stuff is. So we went over there, and Mikey was saying little prayers and putting anointing oil on the doors and was flinging holy water around. And things seemed to kind of calm down for a little while, 3 or 4 weeks after that. Then, once again, we got another fire alarm on the fourth floor. I mean, we got these things all the time. The contractors, whoever the service company was out there replacing heads, you could see they put new heads in. You could see they were checking wirings. And one time I think there was even a ladder left up there in a tool bag from one of the guys working. So it's like I knew they were working on it. And I don't know what happened or how they were doing this. But then we had a night to end all nights. And I want to share that with you guys. And then from here it was an escalation and things got worse. So a few nights later, Mikey and I are driving around, listening to coast, chit-chatting, getting out periodically, walking around, driving up to the top of the structures, enjoying the view, just killing time, patrolling around, doing your security thing, Pretty quiet job in general. And we're driving through the parking structure close to the CBT building, because we just drove through the other ones. And right as we got on that third floor of that parking structure again, this time I started to get creeped out. And you always drove around with the windows down, especially in the summertime, because it was nice and it was your way to hear if you heard skateboarders or people talking or whatever. And I kind of stopped and looked over at the CBT building. I'm like, Mikey, I'm getting a little creeped out. He's like, yeah, me too. All of a sudden, across our radios, our security radios, these professional radios, we get this like disembodied demon growling voice, like it sounded like Latin or something. And it would come across radio for 2 or 3 seconds and hang up, 2 or 3 seconds, hang up, 2 or 3 seconds, hang up. And we were like, whoa, what in the hell is that? It sounded like a demon trying to call us on the radio. So I get out of there, and I'm calling on my phone as I'm driving back to the dispatch area. And I called up the guy who, I think it was John in there at that time. And I'm like, did you pick up the IDs on that radio? See, every radio has an ID if it's on that frequency. And all of our radios that were issued to the officer, the supervisor radios, even radios from other divisions that could switch over and talk on our frequency, it would be radio 7-29789, radio Zulu Alpha KW928 or something like that. Everyone had a serial number. And I asked him, did you hear those voices? And I walk in there, and his eyes were real big, and he was like, yeah, I heard those. That wasn't you? And I'm like, no, why would we make those noises? And then Harry came down to dispatch, who was in that building, and he's like, what was those noises? I'm like, I have no idea. I'm like, did you get a radio ID? And he's like, well, when the first one came across, I didn't know what was going on. But by the second or third one, I thought about that, and the radio ID came up unknown. And I'm like, how long have you been doing this? He's like, I've been doing this for years. Have you ever seen unknown come up? He's like, actually, no. Even when we get static or crossbreed from another channel, it usually gives me some kind of a number or some kind of a transmitting code. He's like, I've never seen unknown come up on there before. So that was incredibly odd. And this kind of started out that very night. Mikey grabbed his stuff and decided to go over to the building, his Bible, his holy water, and he was going to finish it this night, as he said. And I said, Mike, let's not promote this. This is some weird stuff. Let's just live our lives. And he said, no, we're going to finish this. So we walked on over to the CBT building. So Mikey and I went up there. We got up on the 4th floor, and we started to walk around. And the very, very first, we went from the elevators. I think we walked around the inner corridor. Very eerily quiet, very calm. Nothing, just maybe a little creepy quiet, but nothing going on. Then we stepped into the outer ring. Mikey and I were standing side by side, and we're stopping. I thought we heard a shuffle or a creak or something, and we went shh, and we stopped. We both looked at each other. It's eerily quiet. There's no AC or anything on in this building. It's just dead still, just a very light drone of cars driving by on the outside. And all of a sudden, from the inner ring to outer ring, there's a set of double doors, like your big oak office doors. And all of a sudden I hear like someone took the door and shook it really, really hard. Not like they were trying to open it. And then as soon as this happened, I ran over and flung the doors open. Didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. I said, maybe it's somebody in the stairwell. So I ran over to the stairwell, flung the stairwell door open, didn't hear any footsteps, didn't see anything. In fact, remember there still being some dust on the stairwell landing. You didn't even see footprints. So I didn't hear, and it's you got to remember, this building's so quiet, and we're only like 15 feet away. You would hear somebody beating feet or running. You'd hear these doors. There's big, heavy wood those big 2-hour fire-resistant fire doors that go to the stairwells, and they long, and then they have the automatic closer. You hear that stuff. I mean, it was just this door, someone over there shoving on it, or something shoving on it. Didn't hear any footsteps. Didn't see anything. Mikey was looking all around. He went right. I went left to the nearest stairwell. He didn't see anything. He came back around and met me the opposite direction. He did a complete 360 in the inner corridor. I'm like, you see anybody? He's like, I didn't see anybody or see anything. And at that point, we're standing by the stairwell that I had just popped my head in and looked up and down. And all of a sudden, I'm like, do you hear that? He's like, it sounds like growling. And it was coming from the other side of the stairwell door. And we're both putting our feet there, and it was... And it sounded like it was coming from the door, and it sounded like it was right on the other side of the door. So I stood back up straight. I think I got my big flashlight out. I think I had a big 3 or 4 cell mag light I banged something over the head with. And I remember I just flung the door open as hard as I could. There was nothing there. Got super creeped out. And then the door shut. And then a minute later, we're walking around the inner corridor. On the other side, I start hearing this growling. And it's almost like it's coming from the ceiling or from the walls. Mikey's right next to me, and he hears it, and his eyes are getting really big. And by this point, he's got his Bible in his hand. And he kind of closes his eyes, and he says something really quick, like a little blessing. And we're moving around. And we go back to the outer corridor. Now, it's like I said, it's 360s as a ring. You can just go. We always joke that you should run go-karts or make a roller disco and just, have, you can just rollerblade in circles and play music. But there were these Cat 5 cables that were hanging down from the ceiling, and you could tell they were every 15 feet or so that they were going to feed like a cubicle section or something. We're walking right next to each other. We do a complete 360, and as we come back around, 2 of these Cat 5 cables are swinging. I don't mean they're blowing in the breeze. I mean they're swinging 3 or 4 feet arc, like somebody walked over and smacked them. Like I said, this is concrete floor. It's dead quiet. You could hear a mouse fart in there. So you'd know if somebody, it would have to be the ultimate ninja in slippers or something to go over there, make one of these swing, make the other one swing. The only other person over there was, and you hear the door opens, and you can see in the glass. So I can see around the corners by looking past the edge of the inner corridor into the glass, and you could see all around. And you would see reflections, you'd see movement, you'd hear footsteps. None of that. And then we walk around the corner, and these Cat 5 cables are swinging on their own. And I started getting really creeped out. And right around that time, we got another strange stuff over the radio. And dispatch calls me over the radio. He calls me by my badge numbers. Hey, did you hear that? And I say, 10-4, I copied. Was that you? He said, wasn't me. What was the radio ID? And he said, radio ID unknown. And as we're walking around this inner corridor, we take a few steps and kind of stop, take a few steps, kind of stop. I was closest to the edge of the building where the glass was, and there's a little ledge by the window, a little couple-inch ledge by the window. And I remember there was a crushed Coke can that was sitting on top of that ledge. And it had been there before. I remember it distinctly because we had walked around. It had dust and dirt on it like it was some construction worker left it on the edge. And as we walked by, I was close to the window. Mikey was to my left. The window was to the right. As we walked by on my right, we took a few steps. We heard dunk, dunk, dunk. We look, and that Coke can was on the floor, like 6 or 7 feet from the window. Like if somebody tossed it like a little frisbee or took the side of their hand and swept it off the window. Mikey and I turned around and looked at each other, and we're like, what is going on here? And as we came back around the corner, those Cat 5 cables were swinging violently again. They were just like whipped around, like someone went over there and just grabbed a hold of it and threw it as hard as I could. By this point, one of the lights fixtures, there was a couple light fixtures left. You have to have some light even in an abandoned floor for egress purposes. One of them started to flicker. By this point, we said, Mike, let's just get out of here. And he said, I just got super creeped out, super worried. And we got out of there that night. And it was just an incredibly strange experience. We had more nights like this, like I'm going to share in the other part. But yeah, that was the first night that I knew that this was an escalation. We had full-blown poltergeist activity, growls over the radios, growls coming from the hallways, objects moving, and this made me a believer in the paranormal. Absolutely, unequivocally, I know it exists, and it felt evil to me.